Hey David, how you
Good
doing?
man. How are you, Pete?
I'm absolutely fantastic. I'm so pumped to have you here today on our Camp Modern Sales Virtual Summit. It wouldn't be a virtual summit, an MSP virtual summit, without Sales Loft leadership. So I'm super pumped to have you here, folks. I'm really excited to have David, who's the CEO of Sales Loft. He's been there for a hot second now. We're going to talk about that a little bit here in a sec. Just by way of introductions here. For folks who don't know me, my name is Pete Kazanjy. I'm one of the founders of Atrium, makers of data-driven sales management software, and also one of the founders of MSP here. And David's been around the block a couple times. Very he's the revenue guy, obviously the CEO of Sales Loft here. But David, maybe you can kind of give folks a little bit of your background, like what you spent time on before Sales Loft, and obviously you did a stint at Salesforce, the OG in the space, and give folks a little bit of a update on that, and then also, what you're spending your time on doing now over at, leading the Lofters.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Pete. Thanks for having me. So I am day 110 at Sales
Well,
Loft.
who's counting?
Yeah, exactly. So, yep, 110 business days in today.
Wow.
Glad we're spending the time together. I actually started my career, believe it or not, about a million years ago as a database engineer, and quickly realized that was,
Wow.
while I loved aspects of it, it was definitely not an area that I was going to excel in to the degree I wanted. Moved over into go-to-market operations very early on in my career. Spent my 20s in mostly pre-IPO companies, a lot of developmental tools, so selling into IT, and which was probably a bit of a natural extension of just my orientation as a database engineer. But
Yeah.
moved when I was in my early 30s to Salesforce when it was about 20 million in ARR, and spent just shy of a decade there. And it was really foundational and shaped how I sort of formed as an executive over time, and really my orientation around customer centricity. And from there, was really fortunate to partner up with David Sachs and the team at Yammer, and helped build that organization, which was a blast. Where Salesforce really helped me understand the need to maniacally focus on customers, Yammer
Mhm.
extended that to really focus on users. And the
Right.
combination of focus on the company and the user itself, it really informed me in pretty cool ways as to how I think about building companies. So from there, Yammer was acquired by Microsoft, spent some time at Microsoft, then did a variety of some other companies and started investing along the way. That culminated in 2018 once my kids launched, went off to university. I sort of hung up my operating cleats back to counting things. I do like counting. Um, After 104 quarters as, either a BDR, an AE, a frontline manager, a CRO, a CCO, all that. I thought, okay, that's enough. Time to go, invest and help guide other companies. And was really fortunate to meet a team, Antonio Gracias and John Shulkin and Tim Watkins and others at Valor Equity Partners, and became a partner at Valor, which is a private equity firm that's deeply focused on operating as well as investing. And spent several years there, parachuted into one of their portfolio companies for a couple of years, and then was contemplating going back, which was sort of always the plan, when I got a crazy call from Kyle Porter, the founder of SalesLoft, who was in New
He's pretty
York.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, he was in New York, and he said, "Hey, why don't we have a drink?" And we met one night with Steve Goldberg, their CRO, who I've worked with in two companies, and I just moved. My wife and I just moved to New York about a year earlier, and I came back from that dinner, and she woke up the next morning, and I said, "How do you feel about me going to running a company in Atlanta, Georgia?" So, if any of you have been married, you'll definitely understand the look I got when my wife said, "Wait, we just moved to New York, and you're what?" But
It's only a
that's
3 hour flight. It's
yeah.
quick,
But
quick.
yeah, that's sort of the short version of how I got here.
I love it. I love it. And that, I totally forgot about. Well, sorry, I didn't forget about the Yammer piece, but actually, we were lucky enough here at MSP to have David Sachs do a fireside chat a few quarters ago, actually, where he kind of talked about the Yammer experience kind of going the other direction, insofar as like he and some of his colleagues obviously came from PayPal, and they were very user centric, very like virality centric, very product centric. Like, hey, I can crack the enterprise, from the bottoms up, all just by button placement and virality and so on and so forth, which ultimately ended up not being the case. Like, you can get penetration in there, but you can't get necessarily monetization there. But I think that like making sure that as an enterprise leader, as a B2B stalwart, having that like user centricity, right? There's like the customer and the account, right?
Yep.
There's the account that like signs the checks, and like procurement that signs off on things, and then it's the users that actually like use the stuff or going to reject it and don't use it at all. That's which right. Of course puts the account at risk. So I think that like that kind of chocolate and peanut butter is really important, which I think like I think that sales engagement, especially the more modern versions of sales engagement, are a really good example of thinking about exactly that. Which and I think I'd love to talk about that a little bit right now, because I think sales engagement, like obviously it's like probably it and like call recording are like kind of the two biggest categories in sales tech. And of course, like now they're kind of like merging together into like
they are
digital selling platforms or what have you. But the point is that the most important kind of like categories in sales since CRM, and sales engagement historically has been about like helping BDR send emails or whatever, which like, cool, that was that 5 years ago. But now it's really moving into actually, how can I facilitate better performance and better execution across all of my humans, my BDRs, my AEs, my AMs, CSMs, et cetera, and not just in isolation, but also from a continuity standpoint. And so I think you guys have been thinking a lot about this, because a lot of folks are like, oh, SalesLoft and their brethren, like that's a BDR tool. I was like, yeah, actually, no, it's not. It's digital selling, and not just digital selling for sales, but digital like revenue, right? Workflow across and so maybe you can kind of talk a little bit about that transition that you guys have been navigating in the last like couple of years or so, and some of the functionality you guys have been investing in there.
Yeah, I think you're it's right on, Pete. So look, I think it was a sign of the times, right? So, when SalesLoft really emerged on the market in 2015, we were in a bull market. People were spending. That's a great mug, by the way, man. Love it. Is that the dude at baseball camp right now?
He's at baseball camp. I love you, Daddy. Normally I have my Coffees for Closers mug, but Mikey the other day was like, Daddy, why aren't you using my mug? And I was like, oh, you got me.
That's excellent. So I will tell you, so my kids are a little older. I've got a 26 and a 24-year-old, and my son came back a few years ago from a trip through Europe and brought me a beer stein from Guinness, and it said "Love you, Dad" on it. So see, you get "I love you, Daddy" when they're 5, and you get "Love you, Dad" when the beer stein when they're 25. But so look, back to your question, it's spot on, man. Back in the bull market, 2015, 16, 17, interest rates are low, capital's free flowing, organizations are buying a lot of tech in marketing and sales, whether it's, productivity tools for the sellers, or whether it's management reporting tools, for managers and executives. But we've seen a lot change, not only in the macro markets, but with tech over the last, 7-8 years. And we now are afforded with the ability to do something we have never done before. Oh, let me fix my camera a little bit for you. And what that is the ability to actually take what was primarily a sales engagement product, not even a platform, but a product for top of the funnel, move it in the middle of the funnel for AEs, but then actually expand it. When you really think about this marketing and sales tech stack, it's always anchored by our CRM, which is an incredibly valuable investment, an expensive one, but a valuable one, because it is our system of record. It holds all of the information about all of our prospects, all the way through our customers and our renewals. And a workflow platform really needs to mirror that. It makes no sense that it wouldn't, right? I think when you take an inside out perspective at the problem, you think, oh, I got BDRs, I need to solve for them. I got AEs, I got to solve for them. I got post-sale stuff, I got to solve for that. But we don't think about CRM that way. We don't buy CRM for different parts of our organization. We buy one CRM. And so when we take an outside in look at this, our workflow should be the same. We should be thinking about this through the lens of the customer, They don't think about it as like, oh, I'm going to go do early stage due diligence and I'm going to buy something and then I'm going to go do something else. Oh, I lost you here. There you are. And so the workflow platform really needs to have the same breadth as our CRM, prospect through renewal. And in doing so, now we have a really balanced partner in that tech stack. Data flows between the two really well. And ultimately, a workflow platform that mirrors that entire life cycle is actually going to drive a lot more value to your CRM.
Yeah. And like, I think that this, like, I was talking with somebody about this the other day about like, kind of like racetrack workflow versus like whack-a-mole workflow. And what I mean by that is like, BDRs kind of have like a little bit of like, I don't want to, it sounds like I'm trivializing it, but like a one-track mind where it's like, hey, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to jam for 120 minutes or along, emails and like, sorry, like all my different touch points. I'm going to get in the zone. I'm going to turn on some like, some high activity music and I'm going to crank. Whereas AEs, it's a very different ball game, right? Like we live by our calendars. It's like, oh God, what's next? Right? Like, oh, I got that meeting, right? So like we live like 30 minutes at a time. And so, maybe we've got like a couple back-to-back meetings and then maybe there's a gap right there where we have to do follow-up and then prep for the next one. And hopefully, we remember to eat something and hit the bathroom, right? And I think that those are just very different workflows. And so that kind of like whack-a-mole workflow has really resisted. And of course, CSMs and AMs live in that land too, right? And so I think that like kind of whack-a-mole, like always like being situationally aware, workflow has historically really resisted automation and like systematization, much to the chagrin, certainly of the account executives, certainly of their managers, but also like the product managers and folks who are like, oh my gosh, we want to like help these folks like not live out of their inbox and instead like know the thing that they should be working on. And I think that that's something that you guys have been working on pretty substantially. I know that Frank Dale has been on a couple of the MSP virtual summits before. He obviously came to the company through the Costello acquisition, which turned into deals. But now I think SalesLoft is really focusing in on helping those AEs, those sellers in the middle of the funnel, be able to be more systematic, more streamlined in how they execute. And I think you guys are doing some work around that recently. And then even before we get to AM and CSM, just like cracking the nut around like providing automation and systematization for AEs is a huge thing.
It is. And look, you made two highly accurate comments, but I think they really center on what the problem is. The first is, you said you're sort of tethered to your calendar and you're tethered to your email. Well, by definition, that means you're going to be reactive to everything. And living a life that is reactive is really painful because you can't control your destiny. And, as we were prepping for this, you have a lot of analogies around navigating the rivers, navigating the rapids and all of that. And I think it's actually a really good analogy. The best sellers I've ever seen, and it's really not just sellers, it's anybody in the go-to-market org whose daily sort of remit is dealing with prospects and customers. You've got to be proactive. You've got to be able to control your calendar. You have to be able to control your interactions. And you have to be able to understand how you best move the needle, especially as you're an AE, because you're dealing with early stage, late stage, you're dealing with existing customers coming back for upsell, cross-sell, you're dealing with potential churn issues. You have a very sort of broad breadth of responsibilities there, and you've got to be able to organize them, right? And you have to understand what the next best actions are to take. That's a lot of what the focus has been at SalesLoft as we have released Rhythm, which went live June 21st this year, but it's really taking purpose-built AI for workflow, integrating it into the platform such that we can understand all of those inputs, whether they're digital inputs coming in that we weren't even aware of before, or they're responses from your prospects or your customers, or they're just the next step in your workflow, and being able to actually score all of those, weight all of those, and bring them into what we call a focus zone. So at any given time throughout your day, you can just go into SalesLoft, look at your Rhythm focus zone, and you will understand the most important next best actions to take right now. Whether you have 15 minutes between meetings and you're in the car, or you've got 4 hours sitting on a flight.
Yeah, and I think like the best AEs, we have this like terminology here at Atrium of like calendar is destiny, and not just because like looking backwards, here's all the stuff that like you actually spent your time on, but also you can like force future you into certain behaviors by like calendaring it and adhering to it. And so a good example of that would be like making sure that you have like pipeline management blocks. Well, then when you think about like your pipeline management blocks, the best AEs, of course, are like popping into an op view where it's like pretty much ranked like, closest to the money, right? Like, hey, how am I doing on the ones where the contracts are out? Did the contracts come back yet? Like, what's going on? And like that's a good like very very rough heuristic. Like we're closest to the money. We're closest to the money. But the problem is that like it's reductive on purpose, right? Because there could be a variety of other things that are going on as well. And like more senior sellers do a better job of kind of having like the spidey sense on that, like, okay, cool, I've taken care of my contract outs, and I feel like I'm in a good spot with all of my things where, I'm on paper process or whatever. Oh, what about this messy middle down here? And then they like, they pull it out of their brain, like, oh, I last had a meeting with this one there, or like, oh, I need to touch that person. But like, maybe you could do that with like 10 ops that are in that state. Beyond that, like it's just gonna like your head's gonna start to like smoke, right? And so I think that this is where software can really be helpful, is looking at those different signals. Like we all know the rules of thumb. Like, is there a next meeting on the calendar? When's the last time that you touched them? Did they reply to that touch? But even just keeping track of like those three datums across like 10 or 20 or 30 ops is like wildly difficult, which is where sales management comes in for inspection. But again, now you have another human helping this. Like we have two folks, and then of course that sales manager has 8 reps with like 40 ops in those states. So it's just too much, right? And so I think the notion of having something that synthesizes these things for us and provides us like, hey Pete, Bobby hasn't accepted that meeting. Oh, thanks, little buddy. Because guess what? There's no way that I was going to go out on my calendar, right? As much as I might say that I would, and like, verify on Sunday night that everyone has accepted my calendar invites going forward. There's just too many signals. And so I think maybe one of the things that I would love to kind of hear more about is you talked about purpose built.
Yeah.
AI. Maybe you can kind of talk a little bit more about how that can help synthesize these next best actions for sellers.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to touch on one thing you said earlier as a precursor to this. So it is human nature for us to gravitate towards those opportunities that are closest to close.
Totally.
The challenge with that, though, is that's what, if you do that at the exclusion of everything else, you end up on those 90-day hamster wheels.
Oh, totally.
Which is brutal. We used to do this thing years ago on my team when I was a frontline manager at Salesforce. We brought the team together, and this was a team that focused on the largest enterprise deals in the company and around the world. And we brought everybody in, and it was time to give everyone their comp plans for the year. And I was thinking a lot about it. And these were a bunch of type A, very experienced, great sellers, some of whom I still work with today. And I was thinking about it, and all of them wanted to make a lot of money, way more than what their OT, their on target earnings are. So we actually did an exercise, and I had no idea how it was going to go. But what we did was I created 3 envelopes for everybody. One was with their comp plan, and I just marked it 100%. Another was with what they would need to actually sell to hit 200% of their number. And then I translated what 200% would be in terms of dollars based on accelerators. And then I did an envelope for 300%.
Wow.
What that was. And at the time, those comp plans, 300% of your number got you about $1 million.
Wow.
And so I sat down with everybody and I said, okay, look, I've got 3 envelopes for each of you. You all have to sign the first one because it's, legal compliance, whatever. But I want you to actually think about what you want to accomplish this year and then pick the envelope that represents that and look at that number. And that's your quota in your head. You want to make $1 million this year. Do not think about your quota at OTE. Think about this quota. And it was really interesting. You would think everyone would pick the 300% $1 million envelope, and they didn't. Some of them did. About half of them did. But some picked 200%, and some said, no, look, I'm just good hitting my number, going to club, and that's good enough for me. But what was really interesting about it were the tactics that each of those AEs took based on the target that they set for themselves. So the ones that set bigger targets, and by the way, everyone came within 80% of the target they picked, which is fascinating.
Interesting.
It was
It's like
really,
it's like visualization and like, create
yeah.
your own destiny sort of thing.
But the bigger the number required the more proactive approach. And my computer keeps timing out. I don't know why. And so, but what it drove is, I think, getting to the core of what we're talking about here, which is sales is like anything else in life that is complex and requires a lot of thought going into it along the way. You cannot just, look, I think there are some sellers in there that, that sort of wing it. They wing it on each deal, they wing it each year on their territory. It requires meticulous planning, and it requires meticulous research, and it requires you to be a master of your product or service. And so, and we'll touch base on that as we go through this conversation. But now let's talk about what purpose-built AI really means. So look, AI is not new. We've had AI out there forever. A lot of us use it and we don't even realize it throughout applications.
Yeah, it's just like under the covers.
And our professional lives. But, that being said, it's become far more accessible as of late. It's become far more secure as of late. And we still have a lot to learn in the data privacy and trust areas around it. But it has now become purpose-built and accessible for very specific types of business. Workflow is one of them. And so what we're able to do now is we're able to actually look at all of the deals across your organization, those that are in play, those that have already closed. We're able to understand the cycle time and stage duration of all of those. We're able to look, to your point earlier, around the responsiveness of those prospects and customers to information we send to them. We're also able to capture all of their digital actions through applications that integrate with SalesOft and feed those in, bring all of that together. And that's how we create the weight and the scores to then inform whether it's an AE, a BDR, a CSM, an AM, a manager, as to what that next best set of actions are to take.
Yeah, I think that like obviously we're here at MSP, land of the sales nerd, and there's a lot of RevOps folks out there who have had this thought before, and managers and reps as well, around like, hey, look, we know that there's implicit signal that's going on, like email replies, opens, calendar accepts. As you point out, there's lots of other things too, like high spot, link clicks, Vidyard, video watches, blah 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 blah. It goes on and on and on and on. And I think clever sales scientists have done wacky things by leveraging the fact that like you've got this really nice CRM that in the form of Salesforce that allows you to push these little activity. What's an activity? It's anything, right? Like a gesture, some sort of gesture object back in there, and it's got some strings. It's got a string in the subject line, and like maybe it's got a type, maybe it doesn't have a type, but anyway, like it's okay as long as you can get that like little like signal in there, right, onto the contact object. Then we can start doing like some creative stuff, right? And like maybe we can do some roll-ups, and maybe we can do some this, and like maybe we can do some Apex. But the reality is that it's all like it's kind of a kludge fest. Like, I mean, definitely it's like fun mad scientist, mad revenue scientist stuff. But ultimately, it ends up it kind of points to why you might want to do it, even though then what you might end up with is like a bajillion different reports. Like I'm guilty of this. Like here's the report of the open ops where somebody has opened their emails recently. Here's the report of like, or here's the roll up of how many, how many replies, or sorry, how many opens there've been for the prospect where on an account that does not yet have an opportunity for, for SDRs or whatever. But the point is like, these are not usable as much as like the mad scientists would be like, all you have to do is go to this 7th report right here that it has all of this information for you. And of course the SDR is like, get out of here, Pete, right? And I think that like systematizing that and making it very seamless for folks, so they're not jumping around between reports, but instead it's just like blended into like a stream of action is obviously a very appealing thing. I think Salesforce kind of like goofed around with this a little bit with the console, but like you still needed to create actions, and it was all very declarative versus it being kind of like AI driven. And so I think that is something that's like obviously very appealing for account executives. But I think you kind of noted this earlier. There's lots of people that touch the customer. There's
Yeah.
obviously the SDR, and then there's the AE, and then like you probably have CSMs, and then you probably have AMs as well. And so it kind of applies across the sector. And so, maybe you can, and I think when even the term sales engagement, people are like, sales engagement, I'm a CSM, or like, I'm an AM, right? Like, I'm a relationship manager, right? I'm a seller. Those guys are pushy. I'm like, nice, right? And so I think the notion of a pan revenue workflow that like applies to, especially given the fact that like CSMs plus AM can be like 2/3 the size of your sales organization, right? Like the number of sellers ends up being much smaller than large. And so like how does that apply for those folks?
Yeah. So look, first of all, I think you're spot on. We shouldn't talk about sales engagement. We should talk about customer engagement. Prospects don't think about this as, hey, I want to go do this one thing. I want to buy it, and then I'll go figure out later how to implement or get value out of it. They prospects come to us because they have a problem, and it's not done when you get a deal. It's done when you solve the problem. And that's a big shift in the mindset. And so workflow, and look, as leaders, we spend a lot of money in sales and marketing. It is one of our biggest areas of expense. And it struggles with being very opaque at times, because to your point, sellers take very different approaches to solving their problems.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have insight into what they're doing along the way, it makes it very difficult to have predictability, consistency, and repeatability in the outcomes. Mm-hmm. And the outcomes are not about getting deals done. They're about building your customer army, building your references, because you can get deals done. Look, you can hire a bunch of folks, get deals done. But if they're not done well, the customers aren't going to get value. They're going to churn. You're going to get a leaky bucket. And then you're going to have to throw more money at sales and marketing for the top of the funnel. And you actually never solve the problem. We have to reorient our mindset. Sales is not about getting deals done. Sales is about building customer armies of referenceable, self-sufficient, happy customers. We used to talk a lot at Sales Loft about we want buyers to be loved. We want sellers to be loved by the buyers they serve.
Right.
And I actually, look, man, I've been doing this for a long time, and I have people I've worked with, guys, gals, whatever, that, we become good friends, and at the end we say, I love you, brother. But I don't have a lot of buyers. Look, I have a lot of friends that have been buyers over time, but we don't typically end our calls saying, I love you, Pete. But I think what we really want is we want sellers to be trusted and respected by the people they serve. And so, you talk a little bit about, in the prep for this, this analogy of navigating rapids on a river. I don't know if that's because you like river rafting or if that's something you guys use.
It's because this is Camp Modern Sales, right? That's our theme to say.
But have you ever been river rafting?
Long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
Okay. So I am by no means a river rafting expert. But I did spend.
I play one on TV.
Exactly. But you look more like a grizzled river rafting guy than I do, sadly. I aspire to look like you. But look, I think it's actually a really good analogy. And there's a lot of them out there, but if you want to go be a seller and make 50% of your number, like, fine, you don't have to do any of this stuff. You can just go wing it, and you'll probably get halfway to your number. If you're lucky, you pop a big deal, you get to 100%. But if you want to build a career in sales, and you want to build a great network of customers that are with you throughout your entire journey, and I will tell you, I got a great example of this. Our CRO this morning sent me an email, and it was a reference that he used with a very large customer that we just closed. But the decision maker in that company is one he has sold to for years.
You trust him.
They trust him. And they've bought from him multiple times. And he reached out to this person and said, hey, I noticed you're connected to somebody that I'm trying to do. One of my teammates is trying to do a big deal with. Would you mind reaching out? Yep. And the person said, of course. And it wasn't about, hey, how great Sales Loft is. I mean, that was part of it, but it was about, you can trust this guy.
You can trust Steve.
Trust what he says. You can trust their processes, and you can trust their references. And the difference between somebody who doesn't follow a process, who doesn't do the research, who doesn't develop a mastery of their own product, and deeply understand the problems the customer is trying to solve, versus one that does all of those things and follows a consistent workflow. It's the difference between having a career where, you can build a rich network of people and solve a lot of problems and be deeply respected, or one that, you have a ton of hit and
Bounce
miss
around.
and
Yeah.
it's not really a profession, it's a job. And so,
Yeah.
technology, when I started at Salesforce in 2002, I left in 2011, technology was, processing, speeds, costs, access, AI, none of that was available to us to actually build something like what we have today. So, we do have this opportunity now. And back to what you and I talked about, the user and the customer in the very beginning, Frank and Ellie, Saurabh, our entire team here at SalesLoft, we think deeply about the user as well as the company, because, these tools should not be compliance tools. They should not be built for executives. So, we can have all of our go-to-market personnel on strings and we can be puppet masters. It's not what this is about. It actually is bottoms up. Just like you said in the very beginning, we need to build tools that take an outside-in perspective, understand the entire customer lifecycle, and then make sure it is purpose-built for each step and each function and each persona and each use case along that entire journey.
Yeah.
And when you do that and you can embrace it as a company across the board, not just in one team at a time, but across the entire organization, it really does fundamentally change your outcomes. And it allows you to build that customer army so much faster.
Yeah, I think the customer army. I mean, this is something like when I wrote a book on sales for founders called Founding Sales. That
I have that book.
Oh, it's probably holding up like your desk.
No,
Probably,
I definitely have
like
that book. It's sitting in one of my stacks of books here.
It's a doorstop. But like the funny thing about it is it's like a primer for founders who are like not sellers, and ultimately so it has to get pretty simple at the beginning. And one of the big things that I talk about is like, look, the thing that people get confused about in sales is that sales is literally just an exchange of value, right? It should be a mutually beneficial exchange of value. And it's not about like selling ice to Eskimos. This is like, the thing I always say, like, oh, that guy can sell ice to Eskimos. If you're selling ice to Eskimos, unless like somehow that Eskimo is like down in like Phoenix or something, like you suck. Like you should not be selling like ice to Eskimo. Like when it's like literally like, oh yeah, I was able to like pull a fast one on this mark. Like being a seller is about mutually valuable exchange. And so when somebody buys from you, they're taking a leap. But like 6 months in, they should be like, man, I am so glad I listened to David. I am so glad I listened to Steve. I am so glad I listened to Kyle. I'm so glad I listened to whoever, because this really did solve that problem. It made me look like a hero to my boss. All of my reps are super stoked, and I'm going to get promoted and I'm going to get a better job. You know what? Next time Steve Goldberg comes around, I'm going to listen to him. Right. And I think like if everybody did that, right, more holistically versus, and looked at like selling and also just commerce as a multi-round game where like, hey, your reputation is going to follow you. And so you better not try to hang a quick one on a mark or what have you. You'd be way better off. Right. And I think if everyone did that, we'd be way better off. And I think that's something, SalesLoft has definitely been a huge proponent of in the market, is the notions of, sales love. We want our sellers to be loved. We love our users as well. And I think your point is well taken around making it such that people can actually, like, the sellers are loved by the product versus the first kind of like era of CRM. It was really, for the CFO, for the CRO, important problems like, are we going to hit our number? Are we like, I need to get visualization on our opportunities to make sure that like, things like we're not potentially driving in a ditch or whatever. That's cool. But once that problem has been solved, now, the people on the front lines really need things to make their lives better. And I think that like, this is something that I kind of talk about occasionally. Like I'll be using some sort of piece of sales tech and I'll go on Twitter and be like, man, our sellers really do live in like the best time possible, because there's not just like sales engagement, but there's all these other things as well. And I think, one of the things I'd like to cover before we kind of close up here is, I think one of the big things that you guys have been working on as relates to rhythm and kind of other things is making sure that all of those other kind of ecosystem participants are hooked into that as
Right.
well, because there's always going to be another like creative thing, like whether that's like, e-sign, which obviously been around for a decade, or like, video stuff, or whatever. Maybe you can kind of talk a little bit about like how ecosystem partners work with Rhythm, so people can understand that.
Yeah, it's great. Great question. And you're right. We definitely, one of our goals here, it has always been and continues to be, we do want our users to love our product.
Mhm.
So we want them to trust and respect us. And that comes with really embracing that, student teacher paradigm in the sales process. We want to make sure, look, buyers, Gartner will tell you buyers can do 83% of their research before they engage with any sellers. So,
Yep.
they already know about your company and they know about your product. What buyers don't know when they get into a sales cycle is actually how to buy this one thing.
Right.
I mean, how many times do you buy a CRM in your career? 2, 3, 4? I don't know, not many. Um,
Hopefully
same
not that many.
yeah, same with engagement platforms, right? And so it is really important for sellers when they engage to be able to establish trust, because that prospect needs to, trust your company, trust your product, trust you, but also trust your process. Um, but when you think about the engagement itself, you are spot on with the ecosystem. Today, we are actually solving for what I think largely is an unknown need, Pete. And the
Mhm.
unknown need is, look, with buyers, their journey is totally different than what it was 10, 20 years ago. They have access to so much more information than they did before. So they are
Right.
taking a lot of actions out there in the digital world that we don't even know about. And so what Rhythm does today through our integrations, through our open API approach, and through our ecosystem of partners is we can actually capture a lot of that, those
Yeah.
digital signals that are happening out there in the ecosystem, and feed them in to SalesLoft, score them, rank them, and incorporate them, associate them with the contacts, with the deals, with the accounts, and then feed that based on the rankings into those focus zones for you. It's huge because, look, it used to be when customers didn't have access to all of this information. As a seller, if you were doing deep, deep research and you got a little lucky, you could truly get first mover advantage. You
Right.
could get to a prospect before anybody else knew about it, and hopefully run a sales cycle before the competition got in.
Yeah.
That world does not exist anymore, but there's a new version of it, which
Right.
is, you know, when buyers go out and do a bunch of research, it creates a lot of intent data. That intent data gets sold to, organizations. Sellers get a handle on it, and they jump into it. But there is a real time moment of this that is different today, and with platforms like SalesLoft
Yeah.
that leverage, Conductor AI and can pull in these digital signals, whether it's Highspot or Seismic or
Mhm.
G2 or DocuSign, or Lean Data, there's a myriad of them. But we can now bring those into your focus zones, and we can let you know in that moment in time what's happening and the next best action to take. And that gives you that first mover advantage back that you used to have, but went away when intent data really came onto the market.
Yeah, like streamlining. I mean, even like with intent, right? Like, it's funny. Like, if I one of the things that I like to do is just make things like very, tactical and practical for folks, where it's like if you're not doing specific things, these are the things to potentially act on. And so when you think about like the third party things that could indicate to you, hey, like somebody's in market, obviously intent data, 6sense, Bombora, et cetera, et cetera. But then, like, we're a big fan of a product called User Gems over here at Atrium. We use the heck out of it because, to your point about customer army, what you want to do is you want to make sure that your high usage customers, because like when they jump, like this RevOps person who's a huge Atrium user, like jumped over here to this like 100-person sales organization. Cool, let's go say hi, or like send them a bottle of champagne and be like, yo, hey, remember us? Like there's a variety of these things, and like I think one, making sure that you are using those tools is helpful. But then two, it kind of goes back to the thing about like the revenue operations mad scientist Pete, who's like got it in some report over here, or maybe some like really annoying chirpy like Salesforce email or what have you, versus like, hey, cool, we're gonna get to that once a month, versus like as soon as it happens, comes into your inbox, you're on it. The meeting is set for like 48 hours later, and we're already in a sales cycle before anyone has woken up. I think that's kind of streamlining is something that is like that's kind of the source of advantage, even if everybody is like, you know, looking at the same intent data or what have you. Obviously that's kind of been a kludge historically, so like systematizing that and having that, like, you know, run together into a stream is very powerful. Well, David, unfortunately we're out of time here. We've got other sessions for folks to go to. This is really fantastic. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us about, you know, how SalesLoft is like bringing together all of those disparate signals in order to make each individual in the revenue and the customer lifecycle more more streamlined, more effective, etc. I'll drop you a note next time I'm out in New York, and you have a great rest of your week. Okay.
Thanks. You as well, Pete. And I'll drop you a note when I'm in San Francisco. Love to see you there.
Okay. Wonderful. Take care. Bye.
Bye.